Good evening. 20% of the electorate in British Columbia are still undecided as to which way they will vote next Wednesday. Now, this is a province which is now, we're reliably assured, a have-not province. We have $1 billion in current debt this year. We have 230,000 people who depend on welfare, a couple of 100,000 on unemployment insurance, and a couple of 100,000 living on the edge of poverty, on gain, etc. Will any party leader level with us? And I asked that question with Bob Skelly here tonight because both he and Van der Zalm, Premier Van der Zalm, are lashing out the promises costing in excess of $1 billion. Is it not a fact, Mr. Skelly, that as we stand right now, with our labor troubles and our economic troubles and the countervail, that nobody can promise an extra nickel for anything in the coming year of a new government?
Nobody can promise anything who is not at the same time promising an expansion of the economy, an expansion of employment, and an expansion of the revenue base of the province.
How can you
Mr.
promise?
Van der Zalm is not. We are promising an expansion of the revenue base of the province by expanding the economy of British Columbia.
These sound wonderful words, but with our reduced labor force, we've got 40,000 fewer people working in the province. Which economy are you going to expand and how? Government services, more taxes on the backs of people?
Can't be done, because the Socreds have already jacked up taxes in this province unmercifully. They've jacked up rates, they've jacked up user fees, they've jacked up Medicare fees, hospital user fees, all of those things that people in the province of British Columbia pay in addition to their taxes have also been increased by the social credit
And
government.
if they hadn't done that, what would the current debt and newly borrowed money be this year?
In spite of that, Jack, the deficit in this province has accumulated to $5.1 billion. We're paying more in interest on that deficit than we're paying in total grants and aid to municipalities in this province.
But
this year, we're running up an $872 million deficit. We're borrowing that money to pay for the number of people on welfare in the province of British Columbia. That's all under social credit mismanagement. That's the reason why we're in such difficulty in this province today.
I have your list of promises right in front of me. Net cost of NDP programs, $1.143 billion.
Absolutely.
And you're gaily going to throw $417 million into education, another $300 million into gain reform. You're going to throw $300 million into reforestation, municipal works $240 million, housing $40 million, and a youth guarantee of $150 million. When would this pie in the sky appear? 10 years down the road?
First of all, it's not pie in the sky. And first of all, it's being done, and it's being done successfully in other countries around North America, other states and provinces around North America, and in other countries around the world. What we're saying is let's look at programs elsewhere in the world that have contributed to successful economies, and let's adopt those programs for here in British Columbia.
Take you a long time if you were to win the government, wouldn't it? I mean,
No,
don't tell me you're going to promise
no.
this next year.
Some of these programs can be implemented immediately. Certainly in the first year of a reforestation program, you're not going to spend $300 million right off the top. It does not deliver the effect by throwing money at the problem.
Okay.
What we have to do is to move into that program gradually, increase by employing more and more people until you're spending the full $300 million allocation. We intend to do that as quickly as possible. Look at the case of Manitoba. Establish the Jobs Fund, set up millions of dollars in funding, put 33,000 people back to work in Manitoba. Today in Manitoba, they have the lowest unemployment rate in Canada at 5.9%.
But they started off with a pretty level rate of 8 and 7.5% when their economy was much better than ours for a longer period of time.
No, their economy had been annihilated by Sterling Lion.
Let's forget Manitoba. Let's look at the image of this man Skelly. And I'm going to paraphrase some of your promises, which makes the social credit to say, that man's crazy. Assistance for rape and violence, yes. Bigger government subsidies for daycare, absolutely. Better pay for daycare workers. Higher welfare rates, yes, 30 to 60%. Aid for everybody. Elimination of Medicare premiums, yes. Guaranteed annual income scheme. Are you not really going for the old socialist pie in the sky?
Remember, Jack, one of the criteria for our programs is that those programs must be self-financing. They must pay a net return to the people of this province. Let's look at the issue of of making more daycare places available. Take a look at the state of Massachusetts. They wanted to get women off the welfare rolls in the state of Massachusetts. What they did was they provided daycare subsidies and they provided transportation subsidies. The result, 25,000 people off the welfare rolls, back at work. Massachusetts in 1975 had a $500 million deficit. In 1985, a $575 million surplus, and declared the largest tax cut in the state's history.
You certainly couldn't do that with daycare in British Columbia.
These programs
What about
worked.
education?
These programs
$417 million into education. Where are you going to get it?
We have indicated that we are going to reprioritize the provincial budget. Look, where does social credit...
What does that mean?
Where did social credit get $802 million for Expo? Where did they get $1 billion for ALRT? Where did they get
They borrowed it.
$400 million for the Annacis Island
They
crossing?
borrowed it.
Where did they get $357 million for the Coquihalla Highway? Where did they get $700 million for Northeast Coal?
Granted.
They borrowed every nickel.
And you would do the same thing
Or-
for your particular
No.
reprioritization.
They borrowed it or they took it out of provincial budgets. They stole it from education. They stole it from health care. They stole it from government services. They fired child abuse teams in the province of
One
British
child
Columbia.
abuse team.
They fired counselors for child abuse in schools all over the province of
Would you
BC.
put back into the schools the one-on-one, the extra help, the teachers' assistants, and rehire a number of school teachers? Would you do that?
We have indicated that we will go from school board to school board around this province. We will consult with them as to what personnel and financial resources are needed to restore quality in those school districts, and we will make those financial and personnel resources available to
We've
those
got
school
to talk
districts.
briefly about this incredible promise you have of jobs or training or school for youth between 15 and 24. How much would that cost you? 150 million in the first year.
Right now, we have 54,000 of our young people who are unemployed. They're either getting welfare. In some cases, if they've been lucky enough to work under the current UIC regulations, they're getting unemployment insurance. In other words, they're a net drag on the economy. We estimate that that's costing us more than $150 million.
So you
What we're saying is let's get those young people on a contract basis over a 2-year period and get them back into the education stream, back into vocational training, or into employment at a cost of $150 million. We'll be saving money over welfare.
You were saying the kids would go into that, and if they didn't go into that, you'd probably say, if you don't come into the scheme, you don't get welfare.
No, you cannot use coercion in the welfare system in this province because that's denied to us under the Canada Assistance Plan. But I expect we'll have so many young people volunteering for this program that we won't have any difficulty having to force people onto it.
More with Bob Skelly, leader of the NDP, the man who wants to be the Premier of British Columbia, after the break. A couple of points I must challenge Mr. Skelly on before I go to the telephones, which I plan to do, even though this is a foreshortened program. And the first is that you and Jack Monroe disagree on the effects of the countervail. He says it will mean little or nothing in the way of lost jobs if it stays at 15%, and you say 2,400 jobs directly plus 5,000 spin-off jobs.
Indirect, yeah.
Who's right, you or Monroe?
Well, I hope Jack Monroe's right. I hope we don't lose any jobs as a result of the imposition of that countervail. But we have seen studies done by Peter Pierce. We have seen studies done by BC Central Credit Union economists who indicate that as many as 2,000 to 3,000
There's
jobs
no
could be
dispute
lost.
between you. You just hope Monroe is right.
I hope Monroe is right, but we've got other studies that indicate as many as 2,500 to 3,000 jobs directly can be lost, 5,000 jobs indirectly.
Oh, but more than that, if it comes to 32%, it could decimate the industry in British Columbia, depending on the value of the dollar. But
That's right. I don't know what the response of the American industry is going to be to the 15%. If they
first
don't
thing
like
you
it,
came up with, though, was that even my eyebrows went up when you said job security for the IWA, that you would legislate
Yeah.
the positions in a bargaining unit,
no,
and that would solve the current IWA dispute.
no.
Surely that's what you said.
We say-
Guarantee job security.
No, you cannot guarantee job security. What we have indicated is we will bring in legislation which very similar to legislation in Western Europe, in Scandinavia, in France, in Germany, in Belgium, the Netherlands, in Japan.
Oh, don't name any more countries.
That-
But we've got detailed union contracts under which the union at the moment gives technological change, more efficiency, and has procedures whereby people can be bumped. How can you improve on that? You can't help Monroe unless you say the positions in a bargaining unit are protected.
What this legislation would say is that any change that takes place within a company's operations which affect the jobs of the workers must first of all have notification well in advance of that change taking place.
Automation.
So the unions will
Pre-notification.
understand, so the workers will understand exactly what changes are about to take place and what adjustments they must make as workers to accommodate those changes. Secondly, a mechanism has to be set up between government, between the workers, and between the corporation to make sure that workers do not suffer as a result of the changes that take place in corporate flexibility.
But how can you say that when the big scream of the employers here is if they don't get flexibility, if they can't do contracting out, they cannot survive in the marketplace? And you're coming in with protective socialist legislation which would cripple the big companies.
This legislation is in effect even in conservative Holland today. They wouldn't throw out that legislation just because it's labeled socialist. Look, here's what happens. What they do is a worker who's committed his whole life to the enterprise, his intelligence, his energy to the enterprise, is his investment in that enterprise is valued just as much as capital investment.
Providing the company doesn't go broke, he's all right.
And if that worker's investment in labor is valued, then he's going to make sure the company doesn't go broke as well. So what is done, Jack, in the second part of the process is that worker, if he's old enough, is pensioned off early or he's retrained and placed elsewhere in the economy.
You're
or
talking
he's
about
placed elsewhere
European
in the
labour
corporation.
relations which don't seem to apply in British Columbia at the moment.
And Japanese, where if unemployment goes up to 2.9% in Japan, there's riots in the streets. I think we should be valuing the investment that workers place in an enterprise instead of throwing them off like so many spare
Does
parts.
it not depend on the balance sheet?
Can we afford to, Jack? When those workers are tossed out of the enterprise and they end up in the lap of the government and we have to pay their UIC, we have to pay their welfare, we have to pay their medical plans, we have to pay their housing.
We have to create money, though, and wealth, and we've got to sell our stuff abroad because we're a very hard-hit primary resource province.
But I'll tell you, Social Credit's response to that is, yeah, toss them out of the enterprise, we'll look after them on the welfare system, we'll run up a deficit of $1 billion annually, an accumulated deficit of $5 billion.
It is socialism or free enterprise, really.
No.
This election.
No.
Next question.
We want to help enterprises become more competitive, but not on the backs of their workers.
Will you tell the people of BC that if you're elected, there will be no SkyTrain to the airport? Not now, anyway.
I'm going to do what Mr. Van der Zam does
Borrow
on
the
this
money.
one. No, I'm going to say we're going to take a look at it.
Now, next thing, you're going to review it.
We're going to review it, and I'll
Next
tell you,
thing-
Jack, we'll apply the same criteria that we apply to our programs.
You
If it
would-
will return a net benefit to the Crown over time, and if it makes sense on that basis, then we'll do it.
You remember the last time the NDP came into power, and our friend Bob Strachan gave them that incredible settlement on the ferries because there was a gun to his head. Can you reassure people there won't be the same throwaway ebullience of the Barrett regime, 72 to 75, as you promised free collective bargaining and the right to strike for teachers?
There will be no throwaway ebullience, as there was none in the Barrett regime. There will be none now. The most spendthrift government we've had in the history of this province is the government we've seen from 1975 to 1986, where they've run up the debt from $4.4 billion to well over $18 billion, and they've run the largest deficit in this province's history to $5.1 billion
I understand that. Current debt.
We will be tough, fair, good faith collective bargainers with employees in the public sector.
Having the right to strike.
They have the right to strike right now.
Teachers.
Teachers all across Canada have the right to strike.
One question. I've got to ask you it before anybody else does. How's your health? You had another kind of dramatic pause yesterday, and your friends say, hey, is his health good?
My health is excellent. There are some situations I find myself in, Jack, that I feel uncomfortable with. I get a little bit nervous about.
Hyperventilate?
I don't know if I hyperventilate or not. It's a nervous condition. So
Well, you can tell me you're just tired from this horrendous campaign.
I'm ready to go in this campaign, Jack. Ready to beat Mr. Van der Zam on October the 22nd.
Phone calls now, after the break. Please keep your questions short, sharp, and to the point if possible. Go ahead, please, to Bob Skelly.
Okay, Mr. Skelly, I'm a single mother. I have 2 young children. The only job that I can find is a part-time job, and I'm working at minimum wage. I understand that Mr. Vander Zalm has said something about eliminating the minimum wage in this province, and I'm terrified that that's going to happen.
Mr. Vander Zalm has come forward now with a $4 minimum wage. He changed it from the beginning of the campaign when he said you might not need it in some areas. What is your promise on minimum wage?
Well, first of all, let me talk about Mr. Vander Zalm's promise, because we're getting some different messages from Mr. Vander Zalm and his Minister of Labour. On the one hand, we were told by the Minister of Labour that at the Prince George cabinet meeting, they voted down a proposal to increase the minimum wage in this province. Subsequently, Mr. Vander Zalm said, yes, we've supported it, or we voted for it, and there is a secret order in council. I challenge Mr. Vander Zalm to say who's telling the truth on this issue. Table the secret order in council, register the secret order in council, let's see what his plans are.
I'm not aware of any secret order in council. I thought he had stated publicly, in fact, I heard him say he will introduce $4 if he wins the election.
Well, in fact, in Prince George, they defeated a proposal to increase it. But let me tell you what our proposal is. It's to raise, upon election, to raise the minimum wage by 50 cents an hour, 6 months later to raise it by another 50 cents an hour, and so it would be $4.65, and 6 months revisions beyond that until we get an acceptable minimum wage in this province that's above the poverty line.
You're now going up beyond the $4.65 an hour, and years ahead to $6 or $7 an hour.
No, we're not talking about the amounts in years ahead, because I think we have to revise the minimum wage according to the cost and standard of living in the province.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, Mr. Skelly. I'm a handicapped middle-aged man. I've got 3 short questions for you. First of all, will you unfreeze the rates for handicapped persons' income assistance? They have been frozen really for 4 years. Secondly, will you get retraining and jobs for handicapped people who could work? And thirdly, for those who are severely handicapped and can't get HPIA, will you make it easier for them to get it, as well as maybe for disabled workers on WCP?
Okay, there's your question.
Okay, I'm not sure I can answer those questions in detail, but certainly we would like to see handicapped people participate in the labor force as much as is possible for them to participate in the labor force. In addition, we think it's criminal that HPIA rates have been frozen for the last 4 years. People should not be forced to live in poverty because they can't work as a result of a disability. So we're saying, yes, we would increase HPIA rates.
Yes, I'm a 17-year-old high school student, and I'd just like to know where all these educated students are going to go after university or college.
It's a good point. Right now they're going to, PhDs are driving taxis in this province, architects are digging ditches. When they can get jobs digging ditches, the vast majority of them are being advised to go outside the province if they want to find work in their chosen profession. What we have to do in British Columbia is to expand the domestic economy to put those educated people to work in British Columbia.
What would you, is it not a grave danger that you, because of the typical capitalist nervousness, will drive away investment in BC?
In fact, a number of economists looking at the investment across Canada have found that investment in British Columbia has declined under social credit by 47% in real terms over the last 5 years. And in fact, a book called The Next Canadian Economy shows that investment is skipping over British Columbia and going to places like Manitoba, where the NDP government has expressed confidence in the economy.
Go ahead, please.
Hi there. I'd like to know if Mr. Skelly is planning to go into secondary and tertiary industry, because I've heard him talk about logging and fishing and mining, and I want to see if he's going to make a Silicon Valley of the North.
Are you going to give us some of this high-tech baloney?
Well, look, high-tech is a good thing if it's applied to the industries you currently have. I think high-tech applications in the forest industry, in the fisheries industries, in all those industries based on our natural resource endowment are going to help British Columbia grow and thrive. The one thing we need in this province is more diversification of the products that we produce, more products at the higher value added end of the scale, and also a more diversity of the markets that we trade into.
Yeah, this can only be done by industry with some government encouragement, but you've got no specific plans for anything just now.
I totally reject those who say that it can only be done by industry. I think government, industry, and labor in a mature economy have to work together in order to expand the economy. It's McGeer that says only industry can do it or only the private sector can do it. That kind of irresponsibility we have to get out of government, and we have to put a more cooperative, more consultative approach in government that's based on all three sectors
Go
working
ahead
together.
from Kamloops.
Yes, Mr. Skelly,
Good day.
you mentioned the Young People's Program that you have, and it's patterned after the program in Massachusetts, I believe it is.
It's-
Why don't you tell the people of BC that the wage in that program is $2.50 an hour?
Why don't you, Mr. Skelly?
Because it's not patterned after a Massachusetts program, it's patterned after a program in Sweden and Western Europe. Massachusetts doesn't have the program. I don't know what the gentleman is talking about.
You couldn't put all these youngsters on $4.65 an hour, for sure.
And nor is the Massachusetts program like that. But I'll tell the gentleman who called that all of our programs are based on paying people a decent level of wages so that they can spin off additional economic activity and additional employment benefits in the community.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'd like to know what Mr. Skelly would do about the nursing shortage in BC, which is partly a result of working conditions and also a result of the fact that we don't have enough places in nursing schools in BC to train our own nurses.
Okay, that's your question.
Well, it's also a result of the fact that the compensation stabilization program in this province has suppressed the wages of healthcare professionals so that they are no longer competitive with wages in other provinces. Even nurses who are being trained in British Columbia and healthcare professionals, lab technicians, who are being trained in British Columbia are going elsewhere because they know they can get higher wages elsewhere.
Have you got money to do it here? I mean, this is the big worry about everybody's promises. Can you lash out the money for all these things you talk about and for, say, training more nurses?
Well, it appears that the current government has run into the problem of having a wage bubble because now they're offering a 10% increase to the HSA, they're offering a 12% increase to nurses because they've artificially suppressed those wages through the CSP
Would you
program.
suggest that Mr. Van der Zam has fouled up two sets of negotiations, the IWA and the HSA? Would you?
Yeah, I say that between Mr. Van der Zam and Mr. Bennett, he's fouled up labor negotiations in this province for the last decade.
Do you think it's proper for a premier to step in a campaign and throw in money to settle a strike?
When the public interest is affected, I think it's appropriate for the premier to step in. I don't think it's appropriate for the premier to step in with his political campaign manager and set up a podium and flags to announce a resolution of a dispute in which
You're talking about David Poole?
in which he hopes to gain political advantage. I think Mr. Van der Zam should have used his office to bring the parties together and applied the best talent he had available, labor relations talent, to resolve that dispute.
Last call to Bob Skelly. Go ahead, please.
Yes, two questions, Jack. One to Mr. Skelly, one to you. Mr. Skelly, you're always crying about the teacher-pupil ratio in the schools in BC. Well, in the Squamish paper here a couple of weeks ago, they came out with a new ratio. Apparently, they have now hired 182 students to teach 3,098 students.
182 teachers
to 3,098 students.
We'll have to deal with that very briefly. Should the teacher-pupils ratio be improved in British Columbia?
I think it's well known that with a smaller pupil-teacher ratio, you get a much better personal contact between teachers and pupils. You get a much better system of education at a certain level. So we would like to see class sizes reduced.
And there we must leave Bob Skelly, leader of the NDP, campaigning for his party in Wednesday's election.